Good morning, Strathclyde. It's a pleasure to be here today and talk to you about many passionate things in my life, and I think it's a good follow-on from the introduction we've had this morning from our two speakers. So the title is Thank You for Your Difference. So first, thank you for what you bring to us. And it's really about the link between diversity, equity and inclusion and the innovation, and how we can boost innovation using the concept together. So we'll start with the difference, and this is really to define what that difference is. We all talk about common sense. Your common sense, your common sense, and my common sense. It's common, right? Well, not quite. Our common sense has our own difference included into it. It makes sense, but to really bring it together, doesn't it make sense to do it together, to use all of our potential together? And to do that, and to drive innovation, we need to bring it together and start by recognizing those differences. And we're talking today about making a difference, about being the difference, thinking differently, and embracing difference. And that is what makes innovation sense. So, realistically, we've heard this morning about the climate emergency. There's a burning platform. We've spent the last 18 months working through a pandemic, which has basically taught us a lot. We've driven innovation through that time. But why now? Why do we have to make the difference right now? We've come through it, right? Not quite again. We've got more to do, and we can take that advantage from what we've just learned and take the leap forward into the next generation. And it's really important that we do that we understand that we're not just going to create the new normal, that we're going to do something different, and we're going to do it together. So what it comes down to is really thinking about that fast forward to 2050, to understanding what will we expect to see, what will we give to our next generation, what will I give to my children, what will we leave in the world. I want to link that and that message to a cleaner future. Sustainable aviation is absolute part of what we do and what we're thinking about. But bringing into that as an innovation topic is diversity. Well, why is that important? Well, diversity is part of identifying our differences. It's how we identify ourselves, in fact. And there's the visible aspects of diversity. There's the non-visible aspects of diversity. And it's an advantage if we use it correctly. If we consider the 2019 government statistics on 4 of the main criteria and attributes of diversity with gender, education, race, and sexuality. And we'll just take an example. I mean, these are numbers that are real, but I'm going to put them into an example. If we take the stereotypical leader of our UK and government positions at the moment, we're basically talking a majority that is at the moment male, privately educated, white, identifies as white, and identifies as heterosexual. And that leads to, as an example, around 3% of the population. That's deciding matters for us all. And that 3% actually says that's a minority group. So that's a diversity in itself, and that needs to be accepted. But is it right that 3% decides for 97%? Well, it's a bit extreme, but let's hold that thought and leave those questions for question time itself. In terms of the majority view, well, if it was the other view, which is a female, white, state-educated, heterosexual person, then we're talking somewhere around the 38% majority. And that 38% is a much better reflection of the society. But it's still not enough. It's not acceptable to talk about majorities and minorities. We need to talk about everybody. We need to embrace diversity and be all-inclusive. Because if we even take that majority example, which is just an example for the sake of this argument, it doesn't do enough for the population. It doesn't become all-inclusive in its own right, and it alienates up to 62% of the population. And that's a waste. That's a waste of talent, it's a waste of what could be our future in innovation. So what we need to understand is that all-inclusive acceptance makes innovation sense. Also, as we go through this journey, understanding and communication is pretty vital. After spending 5 years in France, I know that I can go to a bakery, and if I wrongly ask for a chocolatine or a pain au chocolat, the baker may not actually give me what I want. It's actually the same thing, but it depends whether I'm north or south. Also, there's some really confusing etiquette, the double kiss. And that's fine in most cities in France. But every now and again, it becomes a single kiss or a triple kiss. And that can become real embarrassing because you can just be hanging in the air. And even worse is do I go to the left or do I go to the right? Because if you don't take your lead from the other person, you're going to end up smacking each other on the lips. In terms of equity, what do we mean by equity and why it's important, is really about engagement of our people. It's really about creating that level playing field. And it's much more than just rewards, although that's important. It's important that we remove those blockers of somebody has something different to me, that we're all on a level playing field. True equity is stronger when it's an equal growth and development and an equal opportunity. But equity is nothing, and if I take my team of a very diverse bunch of people, I can have the best, most diverse team in the world, but if I don't give them an equitable contribution, then I'm not taking advantage of the whole. And equity can therefore open the platform for innovation to thrive by removing the doubt, the blockers, and the interference that comes with that, and allow a larger contribution to innovation. Then we come to complete the triangle with inclusion. And this is really about valuing difference. It's about understanding each other. And it's about ensuring that we have the right environment. Quite often I'm asked, well, what's the difference between diversity and inclusion? They're all buzzwords, aren't they? And I like what someone told me in the past. There was a recollection that diversity is essentially being asked to go to the ball. Inclusion is about being asked to dance. It's participation, it's bringing people into the picture. And innovation then is created by that difference. But we've got to listen to each other, and we've got to understand each other in order to be truly all-inclusive. Another thing which really reflects on my past and why I'm standing here, I was flicking through the UCAS book one day, looking at my university application, really not sure what to do, whether I wanted to take an advantage of the maths, the English, the physics that I was doing. And it went from anything to being a journalist to being an astronaut. And I decided, flicking through the book, that this aerospace engineer thing looked pretty cool. And it came to light that I'd stood many hours with my grandparents at Liverpool and Manchester Airport, watching the planes take off, redrawing British Airways symbols, and even, most recently, I found an old magazine with the A320 on the front of it. But aerospace engineer, a few years back, may have been called an inventor and an innovator, scientist. If we go far back enough, a dreamer, because, well, what flew except for birds? A bit more in the modern terms, in the sort of wizardry, and you have the conjurer of flight, or wizard of the sky. But had I, in the 17th century, said, I'll tell you what I really want to do when I grow up. I want to make those things fly. I'd probably been called a witch. And is that why we haven't got enough female engineers since the 17th century in our mix? Well, I certainly hope not. And we need to do something about that. I want to introduce the idea of where we come from. We talked about the normal or not the new normal. So what is that? Well, we have a gravity to reset back to normal. And I want to talk about the gravity of the normal majority. And this is all really about the buzzwords that you hear, just go with the flow, let's act in our comfort zone. And it kind of becomes magnetic, this majority. And we like it because we're people, we belong, we work together. And we kind of follow, but we need to be making sure that we're following the right path. It's really, really important listening this morning about the challenges that we face up to the next generation and up to 2050 and the targets that we want to achieve. And it can be really dangerous if we then act as a group, but we haven't got enough diversification in that group, because we'll just see one solution and follow one path. And diversity really helps us open that mindset up and understand the opportunities that we have in front of us. And if we're not careful, the last 18 months has been difficult. And what we'll do, we'll retreat back to that fetal position. We'll go to that comfort of what we knew in the past, maybe even what we've just recovered from. But what we need is a step change, and we need to break away from that normal and use our natural human diversity to do that. Another thing we need to watch out for, we talk about the digital revolution, that's ultra important, but there's conditioning and judgment and bias that come with these things. So as we invent the next level of technology and go down to the next level of the digital revolution, we need to understand, are we doing the right thing? And one of the biases that we're always told about is survival of the fittest, that's evolution. Well, I certainly know some brilliant inventors who couldn't even walk. So it's absolutely not just about survival of the fittest unless we think about the fittest as our insides and our diversity. So we need diversity fitness. And we get a program bias. The idea of is there a digital gender is quite an interesting one. So from robots, can we make them male or female? Well, you can program them that way. And let's take that thought to another level. If we think about the digital revolution, we're talking about artificial intelligence, and we're talking about programming in learning into machines. If we do that in the wrong way, we'll essentially program bias into those machines and exclude huge swathes of the population if we're not careful. Because at the end of the day, when we think about when our children are born, they don't yet identify real differences until a certain age. And then after that, they're either told to celebrate those differences or to take them as a risk. And that starts to bring in discrimination. So what we don't want to do is teach our children further discrimination. But we also want to make sure that what we program into our systems and our digital environment also has the similar non-discriminatory approach. We don't bias that future AI. And the future AI must be AI. It must be all-inclusive. We think about change and conditioning, and over the past, there's been questions about, well, how do you know the Earth is round? Well, if you think about perspective, those people at the time that were really not understanding that the Earth is round, and I'm making that assumption, by the way, were really used to flat maps, 2D cartography, and they had a very local perspective, because how else could they see anything different? They were on the floor. So unless they take a different perspective and lift themselves up and look at the whole, they don't necessarily understand what that perspective is. I've often heard people say, well, why did we go to the moon? Did we go to the moon? Is it just about governments funding wars, funding technology for those sort of aspects? And what I say is, well, actually, in innovation, there's something called the moonshot. And ever since 1967, when we saw Apollo 11 land on the moon, we felt we could almost touch it. We could see that moon. Some say it's made of cheese. But our children and everybody else can see that moon and can see that ambition. And it was clear that would inspire future generations. We could visibly see that. My children also asked me, yeah, it's really good what you do, Dad, but you make things a bit better, don't you, in aeroplanes, but they all look the same. And they're kind of right. And what does a sustainable aircraft look like? Well, in the first instance, it's not going to be a lot different. My prediction is when we get to the real step change, it will be very different, and we'll have different operating models. But there's a problem there, because if you can't see what a sustainable aircraft is, can they even see what climate change is? And if we project ourselves forward to that 2050, how do we really know what we're doing? And the only way we'll know in 2050 of what sustainable aircraft should have looked like is because actually the world is different and it's a darker place. And that's why we need to act now and make sure that we're using all of our innovation to get to that point. I was asked many years ago, and this is about our resistance to change as humans. My mum would talk about, well, why do we need a phone to take photos? And she was probably right at the time, but this was a time where Facebook and YouTube, and we didn't really have mobile data to use the thing. But imagine that now, a phone without a camera. That's quite a strange thought. And then my children, I asked them, what excites you about social media? And they talked to me about, it can make you famous, it can pay, you can have a job of this. And it rewards you for thoughts, opinions, advice, knowledge, and marketing. But it gives me a view on the world. Actually, the paying thing I should have thought about before I did this for free, but that's another story. Innovation, therefore, is about change. And the issue here is that our human nature will naturally resist that change and go back to normal, unless there's a desire to do something different. And just quickly picking up on Maslow's pyramid, this fear of not normal is an issue. And we talked about the fetal position, and if we look right at the bottom of the pyramid, for those who know it, we see the safety and psychological needs. So we're talking about basic needs of food and water and shelter, and then some of them have been threatened recently. In the last 18 months, we've seen sites that we don't want to see again. And we can fix that, and that's part of our resilience and part of our bouncing back. But as we fix that, we also make sure that basic needs creates a safe and diverse and secure space with true equity. Otherwise, we won't be able to get to the next level where we are truly innovative and understanding how we connect people, and we're all inclusive. And the next step up of innovation is really to use that innovation sense and then use diversity, equity, and inclusion as a true multiplier so that we can positively challenge each other, innovate, and deliver with the purpose and the fulfillment that we're looking for. And that fulfillment has to be focused towards the 2050 goals that we have. So if we take a step back in terms of the journey, we see a graph, and I'm an engineer, so I like to use some graphs and formula, and I've kept them limited today. But this really takes us on the blue line where we were traveling. It was the evolutionary normal. And we were moving along, and everything was good. And then COVID come in and give us a big bump. Things flatlined for a bit, and then they dropped. And then we were about to go down on the path of a new normal, which is the red line. And the red line indicates where we would have gone without that resilience, that bounce back. And we've heard about the technological innovations that have really revolutionized the medical industry. The way people have come together during this time has been revolutionary as well. And that's allowed us to get back to that normal level. So in a couple of years, and we are here, there's a nice picture of the center here, we're a few years away yet from really bouncing truly back to where we were. But we've got a lot in our pocket that will continue to take us further and will take us on that blue line. The problem with that is that evolutionary normal is not enough to take us over the barriers of climate change, over the next emergencies. We need to do something different. We need to do that, and we need to add another revolution on top. And that revolution should be in diversity, equity, and inclusion added to innovation. So we use the whole of our people all together to ensure that we create a future. And this needs all of our human talent to do that. In terms of drivers and innovation, we've talked about when I stood as a child looking up at the aircraft at the airports, and that was a true inspiration. And then to see Concorde flying every day, to have the chance to work on A380, a massive collaborative project across Europe and a globalized economy to bring together new technology for the mass. And really, all these drivers are really important. The belief, the hope, rewards, recognition, inspiration, curiosity. All of these things are differentiators. And there's just a selection of people up there. We could have put some others up. Thought inspiration from somebody like President Obama previously. I think that would have been worth putting up as well. Because when it comes to it, innovation is about how we connect each other together and what we have on our insides. It's not dependent on what's on our outsides. It's not dependent on our race, gender, identity, or any other attribute. It's about how we connect our thoughts and our talent together. There's the formula. I said there would be one. And just to finish off, we need to use diversity as a force multiplier. So I look back to Galway's Inner Game, which talks about left brain, right brain, and the interference that it can make to your possible potential. So performance equals potential minus interference, pretty simple. But that interference gets worse when we add exclusion and we add inequality. And unless we remove the interference and the exclusion and the inequity, there's no point us all coming together with diverse thoughts, because we won't have time to understand them. There'll be too much interference. So we need to quickly remove that interference and remove that exclusion, remove that inequity, and then we can bring our people together for true diversity and reach our top potential. And that potential will lead to innovation. So I ask us to embrace difference, use our diversity, promote equity and inclusion, and force multiply that, and that makes innovation sense. And I said we'd start with a difference, and we'll finish with a difference as well. This is a call for us, a call for action. It's a once-in-a-generational chance to change our future together. We need to do more than what we were just doing. We need to use all of our intellectual and community resources now, and our approach has to be all-inclusive. The difference maker for our innovation is to enable our people. It's to start with a difference. It's to start with our people and enable innovation sense before it's too late. So I ask that we make a difference, we be the difference, we think with difference, embrace difference, and we start with a difference, and we do it today. Thank you very much.